The Shadow Within, Part 5. Sara peered through her front window to see Michelle walking towards her doorway, her shoulder-length black hair framing her face like a dark cascade. A second figure appeared behind her. She brought a guest. His presence like a ripple of warmth disrupting the cool stillness of her solitude. Kevin Matthews stood on the sidewalk, his short blonde hair a halo in the backlighting glow, and hazel eyes that held a spark of life. This must be the paranormal psychologist Michelle was referring to. "Hey, Sara." Michelle called out, a friendly wave punctuating his greeting. She strolled up the path with an ease that made the world seem simpler than it was. "This is Kevin, my colleague and dear friend I was telling you about. I filled in on what we know so far, and though a little skeptical, he is excited to help." "Hi, Kevin," Sara replied, tucking a loose strand of brown hair behind her ear as she stepped outside, the screen door creaking slightly on its hinges. She eyed him cautiously, noting how the sunlight played across his affable features. "Nice to meet you, Sara?" His voice carried a slight note of concern, a genuine curiosity lingering within. "Michelle says you've stumbled upon something supernatural," Kevin stated in a questioning manner, watching Sara's reaction closely. "Supernatural, I guess that's what you could call it." Kevin's eyes widened, reflecting a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "Like ghosts and stuff? Because if you need an extra pair of hands or someone to bounce ideas off, count me in." "Really?" Sara couldn't hide her surprise. The idea of involving someone else in their plight, especially someone as spirited as Kevin, unsettled her usual guarded nature. "Absolutely," he confirmed with a nod, his eagerness palpable. "I've always been curious about the paranormal. Plus, I don't get out much, you know. I could use the company." "Your help would be appreciated, Kevin," Dr. Simmons said warmly, offering him a grateful smile. "We could use all the perspectives we can get." "Great. So when do we start?" Kevin's grin was infectious, and Sara felt an unexpected surge of relief. For once, she wasn't alone in facing the unknown. "Now. We'll go over everything, then we'll head to Jack's house," Sara decided, the words coming out more confidently than she felt. The sun had long since dipped below the horizon, casting Sara's modest living room into a dimly lit gathering space for a trio united by curiosity and veiled fear. A single table lamp struggled against the creeping darkness that seemed almost symbolic of their pursuit, shadows pressing in from the corners, reaching toward the center where they huddled over scattered notes and open laptops. "Jack's not doing well," Sara began, her voice tinged with concern as she glanced at the empty chair typically occupied by their mutual friend. "He's growing more distant, his thoughts. They're fragmenting. His slips into the other world are becoming more frequent. It's like watching someone slip into madness." Sara felt the gnawing tension whenever Jack spoke lately, the way his eyes darted to empty spaces as if expecting some unnamed horror to manifest. "We have to figure this out before he's completely gone," she asserted with a grim determination, her piercing blue eyes reflecting a resolve that belied her usually stoic demeanor. "Could it be?" Kevin interjected tentatively, running a hand through his short blonde hair in a nervous gesture. "Maybe these shadow realms we've been seeing are just, I don't know, stress-induced hallucinations? The mind plays tricks sometimes, right? Shared hallucinations are rare but not unheard of," Dr. Simmons said thoughtfully, tapping her pen against the edge of her notebook. "Especially among people who are close or under similar strains. It could be a mass delusion fueled by our collective anxieties." "Except," Sara cut in, the memory of cold, otherworldly whispers still chilling her spine, "these experiences are too consistent, too visceral. We can't dismiss them as mere figments of our imagination." "And what about the physical evidence? That name tag?" "Meg's name tag." She clenched her fist, feeling the ghostly imprint of the plastic name tag she'd brought back from the void. Kevin met Sara's gaze, hazel eyes earnest. "I believe you. And I want to help, however I can. Maybe my outsider's view can bring something new to the table." "Your fresh perspective is invaluable," Dr. Simmons acknowledged with an appreciative nod. "We're too close to it all. Sometimes we need someone to remind us to step back, consider other angles." "Angles," Sara murmured. Her mind raced, piecing together fragments of their shared nightmare. "We need to be systematic. Compile what we know, document every incident, no matter how inconsequential it seems." "Right," Kevin agreed, pulling up a digital map on his laptop. We'll mark the spots where these events occurred, look for patterns. There has to be a common denominator, a trigger. His fingers danced across the keyboard, plotting points with meticulous care. Patterns. Dr. Simmons mused, her professional instincts kicking in. Perhaps there's a psychological aspect we're missing. An emotional catalyst. Let's cross-reference our personal histories with these events. Emotions as triggers. Sara pondered aloud, her thoughts racing. But which ones? Fear? Desperation? Or longing? Kevin added quietly, the word hanging in the air like a specter of his own concealed yearnings. Let's focus on gathering data for now, Dr. Simmons suggested, always the voice of reason. We can hypothesize later. As night deepened around them, the trio worked in silent camaraderie, each lost in their own thoughts yet bound by a common goal. Sara could feel the weight of the unknown pressing in, but for the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't facing it alone. With Dr. Simmons' insight and Kevin's fresh perspective, perhaps they could pull Jack back from the brink, and maybe even save themselves. The room was suffused with the soft glow of a single desk lamp, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper of the unseen terrors lurking just beyond the veil of reality. A trio of figures huddled around a small table littered with scribbled notes and open books, their faces etched with lines of concentration and the faintest trace of fear. The air was thick with the scent of old paper and brewing coffee, a mundane comfort against the backdrop of supernatural dread. "Okay," Sara said, her voice cutting through the silence as she straightened up and pushed a stray lock of brown hair from her eyes. Her blue gaze flickered between Kevin and Dr. Simmons. "We need boots on the ground, eyes everywhere. This thing. It's elusive, but it has to leave traces." "Right." Kevin leaned forward, his hazel eyes earnest. "You're saying we should document everything weird? Timestamp it, maybe even score it on a creepiness scale?" Sara couldn't help but smile, despite the gravity of their situation. Kevin's lightheartedness was a balm to her usual wariness. "Exactly. But we have to be discreet. We can't tip off whatever it is we're dealing with." Dr. Simmons nodded, her fingers tapping a steady rhythm on the tabletop. "I'll compile our data nightly," she offered. "Look for any sort of pattern or anomaly." "Good," Sara agreed, feeling a spark of hope amidst the uncertainty. They were a disparate group, each bringing a unique perspective to the table, her own guarded tenacity, Dr. Simmons' analytical mind, and Kevin's open-hearted curiosity. Sara turned to Kevin, who was watching her intently, his laptop forgotten beside him. She hesitated, then spoke, "Kevin, we could really use your help with this. More than just data analysis." "Of course," he replied immediately, his eagerness palpable. "Tell me what you've seen." She described the incidents in detail, the shadowy forms, the chilling whispers that seemed to echo from another realm, Jack's harrowing descent into madness. As she spoke, Kevin listened intently, his brow furrowed in concern rather than disbelief. "Jack thinks it's all in our heads," Sara concluded, her words laced with skepticism. "But after what I've seen, I can't accept that. It's too real, too tangible." "Shared hallucinations are rare, but not unheard of," Dr. Simmons interjected, her clinical tone offering an anchor to rationality. "Though this does feel different." "Have you ever heard anything like this before?" Sara asked Kevin, almost pleadingly, craving another piece of the puzzle that might lead them to answers. "Never," he admitted, shaking his head, his blonde hair catching the lamplight. "But I'm willing to bet someone out there has. Maybe we're not the first to experience this. Shadow world." "Then let's find them," Sara declared, her determination stealing her resolve. "Before it's too late for Jack or any of us." "Agreed," Kevin said firmly. "I'll reach out to some forums, see if anyone else knows anything. Anonymously, of course." "Thank you," Sara whispered, the gratitude warming her more than she expected. Perhaps together, they had a fighting chance. She glanced down at her clenched fists, releasing them slowly. She had grown so used to bearing her burdens alone, it was both terrifying and exhilarating to share them now. "Let's get to work," Dr. Simmons said, and they did, each lost in their thoughts yet bound by a newfound camaraderie. The night wore on, the digital clock ticking away the hours, but for Sara, the time seemed to stand still, suspended between the world they knew and the darkness that beckoned just beyond their understanding. Kevin leaned against the kitchen counter, his fingers drumming a soft staccato beat against the marble. The light from the overhead fixture cast a warm glow over his short blonde hair and hazel eyes, which held an earnest intensity that Sara had come to appreciate. "Look, I won't pretend to understand half of what's going on," Kevin began, the corners of his mouth lifting in a wry smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "But if there's one thing I'm good at, it's digging up information." Sara watched him, noticing the way his gaze flickered with genuine curiosity, a spark ignited by the unknown. She felt her own pulse quicken in response, the air between them charged with shared purpose. "Curiosity is a powerful motivator," she said, finding a kindred spirit in Kevin's eagerness. "And right now, we need all the motivation we can get." "Exactly." Kevin pushed off from the counter and took a few steps toward Sara, his movements animated with excitement. "I've always been fascinated by the supernatural, ghost stories, urban legends, you name it. This is like living in one of those tales." A floorboard creaked, announcing Dr. Simmons' approach before she stepped into the kitchen. "Count me in as well," she interjected, her voice calm but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "We're dealing with something beyond the scope of traditional psychology, and I intend to help unravel it." Sara felt a surge of gratitude for Dr. Simmons' support, her presence a steadying force amid the chaos. In her, they had not only an ally but a guide through the labyrinth of the human psyche. "Michelle, your expertise could be the key to understanding what's happening to Jack," Sara said, acknowledging the weight of their task with a nod. "Perhaps," Dr. Simmons conceded, folding her arms across her chest as she contemplated the situation. "But it's important we don't lose ourselves in the process. Our minds are both our greatest asset and our most vulnerable point of attack." "Agreed," Kevin chimed in, a look of admiration directed at Dr. Simmons. "We'll need to protect ourselves, mentally and physically. Which means we need to stick together," Sara added, her resolve hardening like forged steel. "No one goes into this alone." The room filled with a silent pact, each member of the trio bound by an unspoken oath. The shadows cast by the dim kitchen lights seemed to stretch and twist, as if reflecting the intangible tendrils of the shadow world that loomed ever closer. "Then it's settled," Dr. Simmons said, breaking the silence. "We move forward, together. And we do whatever it takes to bring Jack back from the brink." "Whatever it takes," Kevin echoed, his hazel eyes now steely with resolve. "Whatever it takes," Sara affirmed, feeling the weight of the name tag in her pocket, the tangible proof of the nightmares that now haunted their waking world. The soft glow of the laptop screen threw Sara's angular features into high relief as she leaned over the kitchen table, her eyes scanning the latest reports of supernatural occurrences. Dr. Simmons sat opposite her, methodically jotting notes onto a yellow legal pad, while Kevin paced the linoleum floor, his short blonde hair catching the light whenever he passed under the flickering fluorescent bulb. "Okay," Sara began, tapping a finger against the backlit keyboard, "we've got a lot to cover and not much time. We need to play to our strengths." Her gaze shifted between her two companions. "Dr. Simmons, you have a wealth of knowledge in psychology, and Kevin, you're more tech-savvy than either of us." "True," Kevin agreed, stopping in his tracks. He ran a hand through his hair, disheveling it slightly. "I can set up surveillance, manage data. Whatever we need on that front." "Excellent," Dr. Simmons replied with a nod, her own hazel eyes reflecting a spark of strategic thought. "And my background can help us profile any entities we might encounter. Understand their behavior." Sara's lips curved in a faint smile, but her piercing blue eyes remained serious. "That leaves me with groundwork," she murmured, almost to herself. She remembered the feel of the name tag in her pocket, Meg etched into its surface, a cold whisper from another realm. "Groundwork?" Kevin queried, looking at her with concern. "Research, going through public records, local legends," Sara clarified, her voice steady even as her pulse quickened at the thought. "Someone has to connect the dots between what's happening in Jack's condition. See if there's a pattern." "Good plan," Dr. Simmons interjected, her tone approving. "We'll each take a slice of the pie, so to speak." "Exactly," Sara said, directing her attention back to the computer screen. "But we'll need to keep each other in the loop. Regular check-ins." "Agreed," Kevin said, pulling out his phone. "I'll set up a group chat for us. Instant updates." "Let's do it," Dr. Simmons said, standing up and stretching her limbs, her professional demeanor a comforting constant. Then it's settled, Sara confirmed, her focus narrowing. We all have our parts to play. Let's get to work. As they dispersed to their respective tasks, Sara couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping deeper into a shadowy abyss. With every click of the keyboard, every note scribbled, and every step taken, they wove themselves tighter into the web of this otherworldly mystery. This was no longer just about saving Jack, it was about survival. The reality of their situation hummed in the air like static, charging every movement with urgency. And as Sara delved into the night's research, the weight of leadership settled firmly on her shoulders, cold and heavy as the name tag she now carried. The room was silent except for the soft tapping of Sara's fingers on the keyboard and the occasional rustle of paper as Dr. Simmons annotated her notes with meticulous care. Okay, Kevin said, breaking the silence. I've been thinking about how I can contribute more to our situation. He hesitated a moment before continuing, his voice steady despite the gravity of their task. There's this online community I'm part of, people who've experienced the unexplained, the supernatural. They're from all over, and some of them are really knowledgeable. Sara paused her typing, swiveling in her chair to face him, her brow furrowed with interest. You think they might have come across something like what we're dealing with? Exactly, Kevin responded, his fingertips drumming on the phone screen. It's worth a shot. If there are patterns or similar events out there, they could have info that we need. Good idea, Dr. Simmons chimed in, her warm brown eyes reflecting a spark of hope. And it's not just anecdotal stories, these communities sometimes gather quite a bit of data. It might give us an edge. Community and data, Sara echoed thoughtfully, her gaze drifting to the window where darkness pressed against the glass like an omen. A shiver ran down her spine as she considered the vastness of the web they were caught in. Her heart raced, but she anchored herself in the task at hand, the urgency of their quest fueling her resolve. All right, Kevin, you dive into the forums, Sara instructed, her voice imbued with newfound authority. See if anyone else has seen them, or felt the world shake beneath their feet. Will do, Kevin replied, already pulling up a browser and diving into the digital depths of the unknown. Dr. Simmons stood and paced the room, her shoulder-length black hair catching the light as she moved. She finally stopped and turned toward them, her silhouette framed by the book-laden shelves behind her. And while Kevin is doing that, I'll reach out to some colleagues of mine. Psychologists, parapsychologists, even some of my more open-minded peers from med school. Professionals? Sara asked, a note of skepticism threading her voice. Yes, Dr. Simmons affirmed, her tone confident and reassuring. If there's a scientific explanation or a precedent for what's happening, they might know. Or, at the very least, they could provide resources that we haven't considered yet. Science and stories, Sara mused, a small smile playing on her lips despite the dread that clung to her thoughts like cobwebs. She appreciated the contrast between Kevin's grassroots approach and Dr. Simmons' academic avenues. Together, they covered more ground than she ever could alone. Keep me updated, both of you, Sara said, turning back to the computer. Her fingers danced across the keys again, each stroke a step toward understanding the incomprehensible. Kevin nodded, already absorbed in scouring the forums, his expression etched with concentration, while Dr. Simmons gathered her phone and notepad, preparing to make her first call. Each of them, isolated in their own pursuit of truth, yet bound together by the same harrowing thread of reality that seemed to unravel further with every passing moment. As the night deepened around them, the trio worked tirelessly, the air thick with the weight of their shared purpose. And Sara, feeling the chill of the name tag still clasped in her hand, knew without a doubt that they were on the precipice of something vast and terrifying. But with her allies beside her, she dared to hope they might just survive the fall. Sara looked over her living room, now a makeshift war room, with a critical eye. The overhead light cast a harsh glow on the scattered documents and notes that had overtaken every surface. As the clock ticked toward the witching hour, Sara felt the pulse of the night sync with her own heartbeat. She glanced at the name tag clutched in her hand, Meg etched upon it, a stark reminder of the stakes. It grounded her, fueled her conviction. We have a lot of work to do, Sara said resolutely, feeling the bond between them solidify, but first, I'm going to check on Jack, going with me? As she grabbed her car keys and rushed out the front door. There was no way the team was going to miss a chance to possibly see these events with their own eyes. Continue the story with Part 6. Don't forget to like and subscribe.